Welcome to this podcast of Concordia Theological Seminary. I'm Dr. Charles Gieschen, professor of exegetical theology, and we're going to be discussing the gospel lesson for the last Sunday of the church year for Series B. That happens to be Mark chapter 13, verses 29 to 37. And as you know, as we come to the end of the church year, the lectionary, the readings begin to focus much more on eschatology and the end times. And certainly in Series B, Mark 13 is the chapter that focuses on the preaching of Jesus about the end days, the signs of the end, and the Son of Man's return. So it's no surprise that the gospel lesson for this Sunday is pulled from that. One thing to keep in mind, even though we are right at the end of the chapter 13, our reading for today pulls on or is built on all of the material before and just assumes it. So sometimes as you're preaching on this, you almost have to bring people up to speed on what Jesus has said in these verses leading up to it, especially the fact that the gospel lessons for the Series B pick up on the first part of chapter 13 and the last part of chapter 13, but not so much in the middle of chapter 13. So let's get started into the Greek text as we focus on Jesus' teachings about the end times. And if you look at the Greek text, Jesus starts hutos, and here he's calling to mind all of the things that he has been teaching. In a sense, also you that I'm speaking to, the disciples are the main audience here, but obviously this has application much beyond those disciples. It's for all of the church, but here he's speaking especially to those who are to be preparing the world for the coming of the Son. So also you, it's emphatic with the personal pronoun. Whenever you have that hoton, you're expecting the subjunctive verb, and it's right there in idete. So when you see these things happening, and the tauta refers back to all the things earlier in chapter 13 of Mark that Jesus has spoken of, namely everything from the destruction of the temple to wars, rumors of wars, famines, to the kind of events surrounding the coming of the Son of Man. So when you see all of these things happening, the participle, then you have the present imperative. Know, be sure of this, know this. It's a present imperative here, so I would say it's emphatic. Know without a doubt that, and here go forward and get the verb that he is near. And who's the referent here? From the earlier verses of chapter 13, we know the referent is the Son of Man. So that's who Jesus is referring to, himself as the returning Son of Man. Know that he is near. And then you have this interesting prepositional phrase. The through rice here is doors, and so it can be understood as the entrance doors, or it could be understood as the entrance doors to a city, and sometimes it's translated gates, like in the ESV. But what it's emphasizing is he's at the very entrance point. He's not a mile off or 10 miles off. He's right there, ready to enter, ready to come in. So you'll know that the Son of Man is near, namely right there, ready to enter. Amen, we know that from the Synoptic Gospels. There's a strong emphasis on the amen as a signal word for Jesus, emphasizing what he's saying, just kind of a red flag to pay attention. I'm saying something very important here. So that amen, I say to you that, and then we have the ume plus the subjunctive verb parelthe. And whenever you see that ume plus the subjunctive, or ume plus a future tense verb, you have this emphatic denial. It's a very certain. Jesus doesn't want to have any doubt here. So it's a very strong statement with the double negative ume plus the subjunctive here. So, amen, I tell you that this generation, then he's speaking obviously of the people that are alive at the time when he's speaking to his disciples, your generation. This generation shall surely not, without any doubt, it shall surely not pass. And then you have the until. Implied here is ton chronon, namely the time, until the time of which you have the genitive relative pronoun referring to the genitive of time, it sometimes is called. So implied here is until the time of which all of these things, namely not just a few, but all of them will come to be or happen. Here you have the aorist tense. All of these things happen. So he is emphasizing that within the generation of the disciples, they're going to see the end times things all dawning. And one might say, one of the things that's missed, people sometimes look at this verse and say, hey, Jesus didn't return in the generation of his own apostles, so is he really being honest here? Keep in mind that with Jesus' death and resurrection, the end times dawn. And so you start having these things all coming to fulfillment. And certainly within the generation of the disciples, you even have the destruction of the temple. So the rocks falling down, Jesus dies around the year 30. The temple is destroyed in the year 70. That's the same generation that Jesus is speaking to right here. So indeed, these things that he has spoken of earlier in the chapter, these things are happening. He's saying this generation won't pass away until all of these things, in a sense, are visible to this generation. And the more that we realize, the end times don't dawn 10 years before Jesus returns. They dawn in the death and resurrection of Jesus, and that we are living in the midst of them, and then they will come to a completion upon Christ's return. That's the better perspective to have in terms of the end times and eschatology. Then verse 31 continues on this theme of, one might say, that is introduced with the Amen saying, because Jesus says, heaven and earth, and obviously that's also an inclusive. When you speak of heaven and earth, you're basically speaking of the whole creation, the visible and the invisible creation. So heaven and earth shall pass away or will pass away, and yet, but, you have the de there, an adversative de, but the words of me, namely my words. And then another example of the ume, here it happens to be a future tense verb, but the same kind of emphatic denial. There's no doubt about this. Jesus doesn't want us to have any doubt that his words will certainly not pass away, shall surely not at any time pass away. We can absolutely trust his words, which have an eternal significance. The creation as we know it, heaven and earth, the creation as we know it, will change in the sense that on the last day there will be a purification, there will be a restoration of creation, there will be a burning away of sin and all of its consequences. But his words are never going to pass away. They're trustworthy. So we can say that about all of chapter 13, what he's just said, as well as of the whole scriptures as a totality. Namely, these things are things we can trust, and things will come about as Jesus has said. going on to verse 32, you have peride. We see that in the Pauline letters sometimes where Paul will write concerning this, now concerning this. So Jesus is simply taking up a topic, and the topic here is the day and the hour of his return. So concerning the day, so that's the more general term of time, concerning that day, and here it's simply the day of the Lord, namely the dawning of the end times, or the hour. Here you're getting more specific in terms of time. So concerning that day or that hour, here you have the conjunction, just differentiating here with the a. So that hour, that day, or that hour, no one, absolutely clear, not one. So notice the udais is not one. No one knows. So no one knows that day or hour, against all of the people who predict the return of Christ, the last day. This kind of teaching is so clear, so much against predicting a particular day or hour, because nobody knows. Jesus is very specific, and he even amps it up. But with this uda, these two uda clauses, neither the angels in heaven, who seem to have they are in the presence of God, so one might think their knowledge is very advanced, but they don't know the day or the hour, nor the Son. And some people really are frustrated or puzzled by that statement, that the Son doesn't know the day or the hour. And I think one of the things that's helpful to understand this is simply that there are, even though you have an equality and a sharing of divinity within the three persons of the Trinity, there are specific tasks within the economy of salvation, within the working within the Trinity, that are to one or the other person. Even though it all is the work of God, one might say here Jesus specifies it's only except I may accept the Father. The Father is the one who knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, nor any of us, but it's the Father. In a sense, it is the Father's role within the Trinitarian action to, in a sense, determine when the last day is. The Son submits to the Father's will. He has a special role, and he doesn't do everything the Father does, and the Father doesn't do everything the Son does, and yet they are equal. And so also here, it's a unique role of the Father in terms of the determination of the last day. That's what it's expressing. And it also helps us to see that if the Son doesn't know, or angels in heaven, then certainly we shouldn't be frustrated that we have not been given a ticket that says Jesus will return on such and such a day in such and such a year. Going on in verse 33, and at one point I might make theologically about not knowing the day or the hour, it helps us to then live in ready expectation. I would say a vital part of preaching this kind of truth is that when we don't know the day or the hour, then we need and we focus on always being prepared, not kind of just setting our clocks, setting our watch or setting our cell phone with a little buzzer that we should be ready at this certain time, and until then we aren't going to worry about it. Rather, this kind of teaching of Jesus is what encourages us to live in ready expectation every minute, every hour, every day, every year of our life. Going on, verse 33, you have blepete, another one of these present imperatives. I would say very emphatic. One might even say it's could be understood as continual activity, a policy command. look around you. Sometimes it's translated be on the alert. It's more of I would call kind of a watchman term. When you're going to stand watch and protect a city, you've got to be on the lookout. You've got to be attentive. And so that present imperative has the verbal aspect of emphasizing emphatic activity and even continual activity. Be continually on the lookout, blepete. And then you have a term that's rather interesting, one that is translated in the ESV, I think as, let me see if I can pick it out right away. It's, be on guard. Oh, keep awake. Yeah, it's keep awake is how the ESV translates it. Maybe a better way to emphasize that is alertness. It literally comes from two words that mean, and I'll just put them on here, agros. Angros is the word for out in the open or in the field. And then I'm just putting the noun form. You have hypnos, which means to sleep. So it's sort of sleeping out in the field, sleeping in the open. And that's not a great place to sleep, obviously. You don't get a lot of sleep when you're out in the open. So it came to take the connotation of staying in an alert. You know, you aren't sleeping in your bed. You aren't sleeping in the comforts of the house where you have protection. If you're out in the open, you're not going to get your rest. So it's the emphasis is more the implied meaning then that the verb takes on, which is from arg, and then the verb is hypneo, so it's an eo contract verb right here. Then it takes on this connotation of to be in awake, to be alert in the sense of staying awake. And that's, one might say, one of the main verbal activities that you have throughout these few verses. You see it especially later in the verb that comes up with right here in verse 34, end of 34, with you have gorein, and there you see that's repeated again. Here I would say this verb is best translated watch. It actually is related to the verb egairo, to stand. So it's, if you sit in your lazy boy rocker, it's easy to fall asleep. It's a little harder to fall asleep standing up. I know people have perfected that, but it's especially emphasizing being up in the upright position so that you are in awake. And so watch, you're in a watchful state. You're standing and watching. And you can see how many times this verb comes up. Comes up at the end of verse 34, comes up at the beginning of verse 35, and then this whole section ends again in verse 37 with that verb, watch. And it's one might say, it's the same theme that we see introduced with this verb, be awake. So be on the lookout and keep awake. Again, you have a present imperative here. So with these imperatives, you can see these as a bit of a policy command or continual activity. Continually be awake, continually be on the lookout. And why? And Jesus reiterates at the end of verse 33 the point that he's made earlier in the sense of not knowing the day or the hour, because he says right here, for for you do not know, the uk, the negator, the kairos, that key time, that opportune time when Christ returns, when that time is. You do not know when that kairos is. Again, just stating in another way the same truth he has said just in verse 32, that you don't know the day or the hour, you don't know even this kairos, when this kairos is. And then in verse 34, he uses an analogy. The host clause right here, just one might say, sets it up as a simile. It's a little bit of an extended simile. He's emphasizing that you have this comparison between when a man who is here, the man is going off or away, probably on some kind of journey. When he is away, what does he do? He leaves. Afais, he leaves his house. Here it's talking about this. So the analogy that he's setting up is what a man does in leaving his house and making sure that people are ready for his return. The analogy obviously is to us being ready for Jesus' return. So here's the point of comparison is you have the man leaving his house, and then he gives to his various servants the authority, namely the responsibility. He gives to each of them to the work, to the task of the house, and then he gives to the doorkeeper. It's interesting, you have that kind of word a little bit earlier. We saw it in verse, we saw it in the end of verse 29, that the Son of Man is right at the doors. Here we have this language of now the doorkeeper, the one who is the man who is over, whose house this is. He commands right here to the doorkeeper in order to do what? Now we have the first occurrence of that verb I introduced just a little bit earlier, namely that verb that we translate watch. Here we have the present subjunctive. You have hina plus the subjunctive. Present subjunctive, again, the typical form is the aorist subjunctive. Whenever you have a present subjunctive, it has that additional, the verbal significance of ongoing, or one could say in order that he continually watch. The doorkeeper, he commands to continually watch. Then Jesus uses that analogy. Just as you have this man who leaves on a journey asking his doorkeeper to be on the watch, Jesus says to his disciples and to us, therefore, watch. And here again, another example of the present imperative, same verb we just saw, used once again. Its root is related to egairo, to be in that standing up, that upright position, to be, arisen, to be standing, to be watching. So the emphasis again, present imperative, continually watch, therefore, because what? You do not know, if you haven't gotten the point earlier in verse 32, or again in verse 33, here the point is repeated again in 35. For you do not know when the Lord of the house, and here the clear indication is he is comparing the man earlier in verse 34 with now himself as the kurios of God's household, as the Lord over God's kingdom, if you will. You do not know when he comes. So to be in that ready state of continually watching. And if there's anything I would emphasize in preaching, it's this verb. The present imperative here, continually watching. And again, at the end, you have another example of that present imperative, the present command carrying that verbal aspect of continually watch. And then with an explanation point in the sense of that present imperative could be understood as emphatic. He goes on, you have a lot of the conjunctions here, namely, we do not know when the Lord of the house will come, whether in the early evening. These are probably the various times of the watch at night. So this would be early evening or midnight, the middle of the night, or when the cock crows, which is probably before dawn. You have the cock crowing, kind of announcing that dawn is coming, or you have then mention of early morning. So early in the morning, that would be the proe rather. Proe would be early in the morning. That would have been the last watch of the night when the sun has already risen and is just broken out. So night's over. It's speaking of the nighttime, and you don't know when the Lord of the house will come. It's an analogy, just as you do not know when a householder will return. You don't know. He may come back anytime in the evening. You have to be ready so you can open the door so he doesn't have to sleep outside. Same also, we want to be ready, watching, welcoming Christ whenever he comes. We can't predict when he will come. And then verse 36, this is coming towards the end, where Jesus says, you have the negating word right here, may, and then the participle. So what it's emphasizing is lest he comes suddenly. Here you have the adverb. So lest he is coming suddenly, and you, Jesus is speaking to his disciples, you be found sleeping. And obviously the reference here is to spiritual sleep. Not to literal sleep. The focus is to be in a state where one is not trusting in Jesus, not actively receiving Jesus, not in the state of faith, if you will, but rather sleeping spiritually, as in a state of unreadiness or even possibly unbelief, which would obviously be disastrous, and that's why Jesus is warning about it. Then you have the final climactic statement of this text, where you have what, the relative pronoun, therefore I say to you, namely to the disciples, I say to everyone. And here's a great text to show how this is applicable, not just to the disciples, but to all of the church, one might say even to all the world. I say to all of you, watch. And again, that emphasis is it's a present imperative. The idea of a policy command that's ongoing, continually watch, continually be in the state of readiness. There's a few things I'd like to say in conclusion in terms of preaching. And here are those things. One, this text emphasizes the nearness of the Son's return. So often we can easily become lethargic in saying, well, Jesus hasn't returned for 2,000 years. Why should I be concerned? It's obviously at least a decade or a century off. So, this understanding leads to people to be spiritually lethargic. And I think one of the great parts of this emphasis in Jesus' teaching on the imminence of his return, is to always have this tension in the Christian life of living as if this is our last day because Christ is returning. So we live it active in mission, we live it active in faith, and also the sense of not living in fear. We live it confidently because we know that last day is not a day we need to fear. It's a day of deliverance. It's a day of judgment. It's a day of victory. It's a day of resurrection. Secondly, a point that I emphasized earlier is that the end times begin with Jesus' death and resurrection. So important to help people see this. It's not just that the latter days are just beginning now. No, they dawned with Jesus' death and resurrection, and so we are in the midst of the last days, and anything between Christ's first coming and second coming is truly living in the latter days. And that's why some of the earlier signs, wars, rumors of wars, false Christ, people claiming to be God, all of these things have happened in every generation of these latter days. Again, signs that just as Jesus said, already in his generation, people saw these things, and now they continue to be true in your generation and mine. Also, you see here, again, the reiteration, nobody knows when that time will come. It's against any kind of prediction, and it's for the emphasis of always living in readiness, always living in watchfulness. And finally, keep in mind, and when you're preaching this, a vital part is the assurance that when we are welcoming Jesus as he comes now to us through his word and through his sacraments, then we are in a state of readiness. He is the one who prepares us to be watchful. When we are receiving him as he is present now, then we are made ready to receive him when he comes on the last day. So the important thrust of this isn't just to be focused on the last day receiving Christ, but to receive him as he comes to us now through his word and sacraments, because that indeed is what helps make us and prepare us to be watchful, as the text said, and to continually anticipate, continually be ready for his coming. May the Lord bless your proclamation of this important text so that your people too may continually watch.